Right. So we oftentimes treat good and evil as pretty much abstract concepts, as if some mysterious substances. And we fail to see that they actually do uh, exist, experience them in a context. Um, and when we start to separate good and evil too much from the actual context, it just starts to be vague and unclear what actually we mean by that. The world we experience is the world of cause and effect, in which actions are performed to achieve an end goal. Actions serve an end goal. This is the world we experience, even if those actions are random. We have a cause and we have an effect, and even the evil is a strategy of a limited beings like us to get what we want. We do something to get something. And evil in practice would look something like lying, manipulating, or dominating, or being cruel to force the certain payoff, to get what we want, to get what we want faster, or not to get what we don't want. But why does it exist? Why do we want to get things? Why we are escaping certain things? Uh, going to we perform the sections, and why do we need these payoffs? So my point is that those actions, which we call evil, pay off because of our limitations. They pay off because there is a scarcity of things. So we want to take. We have fears. So we attack first. We are ignorant. We are lacking of knowledge. So we deceive or we harm. We are insecure. So we push for control, to control things. We have traumas, we have numbness, and so we hard sometimes to feel something. So evil in practice, evil actions serve a purpose, and the purpose of which they are performed is really related to our limitations. We are limited. We are not God. We don't have enough things. We don't have, not only we could have an abundance of things, but we don't have all things. We're not all in one. We're not the source of things. So we are lacking the things, because the things that are out there, they don't necessarily belong to us. We're limited in time. We're limited in our capacity. We age, we become weaker, and then we die. And so we fear. And so we try to get what we want faster. And so we're being dishonest, because the dishonesty serves something. We can get what we want because we don't have it. We want to get what we want faster because we are limited by time. We're about to die. And we want to escape certain things that we don't want to, because we actually experience pain and because we can die. So we are afraid of many things. And fear is a great motivation to many of evil actions. This is not a surprise. But what happens when you remove these limits? If we imagine someone, a being, a god, with no scarcity, with no fear, with no insecurity, with no ignorance, with no trauma, with no need to compete, then we can ask ourselves, what would lying accomplish? Why would even it be needed? What would manipulation solve? What would domination gain if we imagine a being who has infinite capacity and who is everything in himself? He is fully self sufficient. He doesn't need anything beyond himself. Then all of these motivations and reason suddenly don't apply to him. Because these preconditions, those conditions for evil acts, they don't apply to him anymore. Why? Because God is an absolute being who is not lacking. He's fully self sufficient and nothing can add to him. Because he himself is the source of everything. He's prima causa, if I'm pronouncing it probably wrong, but he's the first cause and he's an omnia ad una. He's one from which everything exists, is. And so oftentimes people, again, we imagine that good and evil are some, separate fluttering clouds of objective, any anything, objective concept, whatever we call them. We imagine it to be an abstraction, while in practice all of these performed actions serve a concrete purpose, um, outside of which they become just pointless, just useless to even perform, unintelligent, completely unnecessary and absurd. You already have control. You don't need to take it. If you in yourself is everything, you don't have to, and you don't need to have anything more, because you in yourself is already all you need. You're fully self-sufficient. We understand for people, again, those actions actually, they are reasonable. They are, because as a certain specific goal that is desired, to lie to get some, maybe even not desired consciously, but perhaps needed. We lie to get something. We do harm for the payoff. But what kind of payoff would there be for a god? We are not immortal and we are not complete. We are not enough in ourselves, so we try to have more, to grab more, and oftentimes by uh, what not righteous means, let's say. But God is complete and God is immortal. Evil actions for people can spring out of weaknesses and limitations that produce fear of the scarcity of dependence, fear of weakness, fear of death, and desires thereof. Desires of the opposite, desires of power, of abundance and control. And we never can be enough because we just aren't, because we're just not the source of everything. We constantly worry, we fear, we Um, we hide in dishonesty. Um, we don't do things, let's say, in a proper way because our resources limited, and they're also limited by time. So we hurry and make poor choices because of this hurry oftentimes, because it's costly to us. Um, so we do those acts that are called evil because we're actually small and miserable. But God, who is omnipotent and omniscient, right? He can be viewed through the lenses of human constraints. Human motivations are shaped by limitations, and none of them can be properly applied to God. God is beyond limitations, and so God must be beyond good and evil. I think this is the famous phrase of Nietzsche, if I'm not wrong. God is beyond good and evil, right? Even love in this sense. If you say that, well, sometimes what we call love is actually not only the understanding or actions performed um, out of the understanding of the other person. Sometimes what we call love is just a sexual attraction, and sexual attraction is the result of uh, the of the operation of human body. Is It's the result of biology. But if God is beyond the matter, then how would it similarly could be similarly applied to him? So even the what we mean by goodness of God, the concept of it should be completely changed for God, because all these motivations, some of these motivations are not applicable to God. Again, you do harm, you get payoff. This is the world well, in which evil makes sense, in which evil is not an absurd concept. That's why it shows up. But God has none of these need-based drivers. So let's consider now the harm just for the sake of harm um, argument. Um, so could it be possible that God would just want to harm, not because he needs something, because he obviously doesn't need anything. He's not liking, but he just wants to harm, and to harm and to dominate is just an end goal in itself. Could it be this way? And we don't experience ourselves the world in this way, because uh, even if it's the cases, even if we do evil acts, we perform evil acts not to cover our limitations, we still always have limitations. And those limitations, like our weaknesses, limitations of our bodies, we can go insane, let's say. Um, uh, we are ignorant, we're lacking knowledge. Empathy is the more complete knowledge of someone else's feeling than just a theoretical cognition, right? That you could predict how someone else's would act. But empathy is the actually experiencing, knowing how it feels like, because you're able to feel it on yourself. You're able to know what it feels like. So oh, well, some psychopaths, let's say, they lack empathy. So even if you say that someone is causing the harm because the harm is the end goal, you can't have this argument properly. It would just be um, there wouldn't be any foundation for this argument because, well, we can't separate ourselves from our limitations, and these all these limitations are surely affect us completely. They are our drivers, they are our motivations, like our weaknesses, our ignorance due to the lack of knowledge, mm, our limitation in the capacity. We don't know if there could be any harm for harm without any limitations. So, um, we don't know if it's possible, uh, but let's consider the empathy actually, because empathy is very important for the reason that it's a form of knowledge. So, uh, a reason for many evils, so to say, is ignorance, obviously. And sometimes ignorance, not necessarily what we mean by ignorance, not a rational ignorance, but a practical ignorance, uh, like a lack of empathy. We could imagine, let's say, what the person thinks, or we could theoretically, um, we could theoretically, um, in as much as we can, in our limited imagination and knowledge, know what it would be like to think about what the person thinks and to feel what the person feels. But we don't completely. But in the moments when we can emphasize with people, when we become really close, when we have this contact with a person and we literally feel his pain, this is the moment of also a profound knowledge, because it's an actual practical knowledge of what it feels like. And maybe you uh, would agree with me that when you actually experience what the other person experience, when you actually know what the other person feels, you don't um, want to harm him. When you understand the person, you don't want to act against the person because you have such a complete understanding of him, so and a complete understanding of his feelings, that to harm him would be to harm him yourself. And so the most reasonable, actually, mm, the most reasonable perhaps argument here would be that God actually loves, not because he doesn't, um, not because there is like an clouds of good and evil, and God is in the good cloud, because, but because there is no point for God to be even evil. It's like even exist in the conditions of limitations. It becomes necessary strategy, perhaps not necessary, but at least uh, practical. But in a but in a but beyond limitations, the evil exhausts itself because it becomes pointless, unintelligible. Because when you know completely someone and you can completely emphasize what the person feels, you don't want to act against this person. And you don't need to act against this person because you are a fully self-sufficient. You are enough for yourself and you don't need anyone else to fulfill you. You don't have any purpose beyond yourself to achieve. It's very important because that's um, this is a God with an infinite capacity, a God who is an absolute. He is, in this sense, a beginning and end. He uh, what? He doesn't need anything else to add up to him, so he is complete, and there is no motivation about it. So he doesn't need to dominate. He doesn't need it because he is everything in himself. It's just not applicable. The conditions of evil are not applicable to God because God is beyond conditions itself, and the limitations are not applicable to him. So evil for God, an evil God becomes something absurd and unintelligible. If God has a complete knowledge as to be able to emphasize, then completely emphasize, completely and actually feel what the other person feels, then and not needing anything beyond himself, then it would be just unreasonable, just unintelligent, just absurd and pointless uh, for him to do anything that would be considered evil, you know. Um, so if God is the source of everything, there is no outside thing for God to want, and therefore no reason to lie to get it. He doesn't need to move towards something to manipulate, to dominate, because he's self sufficient. And if God has no limitations, then he has no ego in human sense. So what would it mean? It would mean that there is no I for God that needs to be better than you, than anyone else, or that needs to be better or needs to be in control. God is good, you can say, in your own limited understanding, but completely in his own essence, not in comparison. It's just us who does the comparison of the limitations that we also prescribe to evil, which is just something like what? Failures to perform under limited conditions. Perhaps great failures. Perhaps really great failures that cause a lot of suffering, and so we call them evil, and that's we so dislike it. But does it exist beyond limitation? Or the evil God hypothesis secretly assumes that God is human. But with infinite capacity, perhaps evil simply stops becoming a thing. And God is not merely powerful and knowing. With infinite capacity, God is perfectly rational and empathetic. That is, he has a complete knowledge and he is complete in himself. He has no internal defect. And as I said earlier, evil requires constraints and conditions that God simply doesn't have because he is beyond good and evil.